You do not belong up here. Stand up, collect your things, and walk to the back of this plane. Ma'am, this cabin is for paying customers. Get out of that seat, right now. Yes, film her. I want this on record. People need to see what we have to deal with. The third sentence cut through first class the way a knife cuts cold butter. Slow. Clean. Final. Conversation stopped mid-word. Easy stopped clinking against crystal. Even the soft white noise of the cabin seemed to lean back, listening, holding its breath, the way a room sometimes does when it senses that someone is about to be made smaller in front of strangers. Dr. Naomi Carrington did not move. She sat in Seat 2A. One hand resting on the leather armrest. The other holding a slim black tablet she had been reading from since boarding. The late afternoon sun came through the oval window at a low angle and drew a thin gold line across the lapel of her navy blazer. Tailored. Understated. Expensive without announcing itself. A small platinum pin on her collar caught the light once and went still. The flight attendant standing over her was named Brittany Voss. 34. 6 years on the line, 4 of them in premium. Uniform crisp. Hair sprayed into the same shape it had worn for every flight that month. Her smile was tight enough that the corner of her mouth twitched, the way a fluorescent bulb twitches just before it dies. It was not the smile that gave her away. It was the eyes. There was no confusion in them. No uncertainty. Used to small, hard judgment that had been made the moment Naomi had walked down the aisle and sat down. First class is for ticketed passengers, Brittany said. Loud enough now for the whole cabin to hear. I am asking you, one more time, to move. A pause. Naomi looked up. Slowly. Her eyes were dark and very still. The kind of gaze that takes the measure of a room in 2 seconds and forgets nothing it sees. I have a first-class ticket, she said. Her voice was quiet. Almost soft. Brittany's hand shot out before the sentence had finished. She snatched the boarding pass from between Naomi's fingers the way a cashier confiscates a coupon she suspects of being fake. She held it up to the window light. Squinted at it. Tilted it. Squinted again. As though she expected the ink to fade if she stared at it long enough. 2 rows back, a man named Ethan Cole pulled out his phone. Latte fortis. Polished shoes. The kind of watch a man buys to be noticed wearing. He angled the camera toward the front of the cabin and started recording the way some people start narrating their own lives the moment something interesting happens to someone else. Across the aisle, a woman named Margaret Dahl leaned toward her husband. She did not bother to whisper. They always try this, she said. Her lips were pursed. Her eyes were narrow with the quiet certainty of a woman who had decided, before any evidence was offered, what kind of person Naomi was. Every single time. Brittany made a small sound through her nose. Then she let the boarding pass drop. Not gently. It hit Naomi's chest with a small flat sound and slid down into her lap. A few passengers flinched. No one said anything. That, by itself, was the loudest thing in the cabin. Naomi looked down at the pass on her lap. Then back up at Brittany. Her face had not changed. Her breathing had not changed. Her hands had not changed. That stillness, more than anything else, was beginning to irritate Brittany, who had been counting on the usual reactions. Anger she could call aggressive. Tears she could call hysterical. Begging she could call a confession. Stillness gave her nothing she knew how to work with. You are delaying this entire flight, Brittany said. Louder. I have paying customers who actually belong in these seats. Ethan adjusted his angle. His thumb tapped the screen. The little red dot began to glow. Live. Margaret nodded approvingly. She folded her hands across the designer purse in her lap. About time someone said it out loud, she added. A few rows back, a young woman named Sofia Reyes shifted in her seat. Late 20s. Sar Pais. A graduate student with a habit of watching people the way other people watched movies. She was not looking at Naomi. She was looking at Brittany. Something about the woman certainly did not match the silence of the woman she was certain about. Naomi reached down. Smooth. Unurir. She picked the boarding pass off her lap and held it out again. Between two fingers, the way you offer something to a person you suspect will pretend you did not. I am in seat 2A, she said. Same toun. No H. No apology. Brittany did not take it this time. She turned, full body, and faced the cabin like a host who had been waiting for her cue. Folks, she said, almost cheerfully. Looks like we have someone trying to sneak themselves into first class. A couple of nervous laughs. Not real laughs. The kind that come from people who are uncomfortable but more afraid of being on the wrong side of authority than of being on the wrong side of decency. Ethan zoomed in on Naomi's face. Margaret shook her head, slowly, like a woman who had seen the same story 100 times and was already mentally writing its ending. Naomi lowered her hand. The boarding pass rested against her knee now. Her other hand moved, just once, across the screen of her tablet. A single small tap. A message went out. There was no visible urgency. Her breathing did not quicken. The muscle near her jaw did not tighten. Whatever was being set in motion, it was being set in motion the way a surgeon sets a scalpel down. Quietly. Precisely. Was the come of a person who had done this before. Because she had. She had been mistaken for the catering staff at her own foundation gala. She had been mistaken for someone's assistant at 3 different industry summits. She had been asked, twice, in her own corporate lobby, whether she was here to interview for the receptionist opening. She had paid for her composure with so many small humiliations that it now arrived without her having to call for it. She thought, for one quick moment, of her mother. Eleanor Carrington. A nurse for 34 years at a county hospital outside Birmingham. A woman who had come home from double shifts with her uniform smelling of disinfectant and other people's grief, who had taught her 2 daughters to iron their own collars before they were tall enough to reach the board. Eleanor had once been refused service at a department store counter in 1978 because the clerk had decided, on site, that her credit card was not really hers. Eleanor had paid for the dress anyway, calmly, with cash, and then she had walked home in the rain so she would not have to take a taxi from a driver who might also decide things about her on site. Naomi had been 8 years old. She had watched her mother fold the wet receipt into a square the size of a postage stamp and slide it into a drawer in the kitchen. Some humiliations you keep, her mother had said. Not bitter. Used clear. Not because they were yours to begin with. Because one day they will be the proof of what you survived. Naomi had kept that drawer in her head ever since. She had built Carrington Aerospace Holdings from a small office in a converted warehouse near Atlanta's industrial corridor. She had started with 1 leased turboprop and a phone line. She had pitched defense contractors who congratulated her on her energy and signed contracts with men half her age who had a fraction of her qualifications. She had sat across from a banker who, without ever opening her business plan, had asked her if her husband was the one with the engineering background. She did not have a husband. She had a doctorate in aerospace engineering from MIT. She had told him so, very politely. She had walked out, very politely. She had taken her business to a smaller bank, and inside of a decade, she had bought the building the larger bank had used to sit in. The drawer in her head was full now. And on flats like this one, she did not need to open it. She just needed to know it was there. Brittany turned back. Folded her arms. Last chance, she said. Either you walk yourself off this aircraft, or I call security and they walk you off. The cabin held its breath. Naomi leaned back. Used slightly. A note to settle into the seat. A note to anchor herself to the spot she had paid for. Her eyes stayed locked on Brittany's. When she spoke, her voice was still quiet. But now it carried. I am not moving. Brittany laughed. It was not really a laugh. It was a short, sharp breath out of her nose, the kind of sound a person makes when they have already decided they are going to win. Of course you're not, she said. She tilted her head. They never are. She tapped the headset clip to her ear. Harv. Yes. I need security at gate 12, Charlie. Non-compliant passenger refusing to leave first class. Each word landed heavier than the last. Non-compliant. Passenger. Refusing. Naomi did not react. But across the aisle, Sophia's fingers tightened around her phone. She did not raise it. Not yet. She was still watching. Still measuring. Still asking herself, very quietly, what kind of story she was actually inside of. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, narrating into his phone the way a sportscaster narrates a game he assumes he already knows the outcome of. This is what entitlement looks like, folks. Right here. Sitting in a seat she didn't pay for. Acting like the rules don't apply to her. His view count climbed. The numbers on his screen ticked up. Smiled, just slightly, the smile of a man who had finally been handed the kind of moment that made small accounts go viral. Margaret nodded again. Louder this time. Security should have been called the moment she sat down. So many people you can just tell. Naomi's phone vibrated once against the tray table. A single buzz. She glanced down. 1 second. Then she turned it face down. No reaction. No visible change. Used information receive. Brittany noticed. Of course she did. Oh, she's got people texting her now, she said, rolling her eyes for the audience. Probably trying to come up with a better story. A few more laughs. Still not real ones. But they were laughs, and they filled the silence, and in the moment that was enough. Naomi exhaled. Not impatiently. Not nervously. Used one slow measured breath, the way a person breathes who has spent years learning that her oxygen was the only thing in the room she actually controlled. Your job, she said, looking directly at Brittany, is to verify my ticket. Not to speculate about who I am. There was a shift. A smell. But real. The kind of shift a tuning fork makes in a quiet room. Brittany's smile tightened. That is exactly what I am doing, she snapped. And everything about this situation tells me something is not right. Everything, Naomi repeated. Quietly. Almost to herself. As though she were tasting the word for shape. Being them, a man stood halfway out of his seat. Calvin Reed. Early 50s. Broad shoulders. The weathered face of a man who had spent most of his life on construction sites and who had learned, the long way, when to speak and when not to. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said. His voice was steady but careful. I saw her board. That pass looked fine to me. The cabin turned. Brittany froze for half a second. Then she pivoted. Sir. I am going to have to ask you to remain seated. This does not involve you. Calvin did not sit. It involves everybody, he said, when you remove somebody from a seat they paid for. A ripple went through the cabin. Uncertainty now. Doubt. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. She leaned forward. She finally took her phone out of her lap. She did not hit record. Not yet. She just held it. Watching. Waiting. Measuring how Brittany handled being told no by a passenger who looked the way Brittany assumed authority was supposed to look. Brittany let out a short controlled breath. Security is already on the way, she said. Louder. Reclaiming the room. We will sort this out properly. The words were meant to be reassurance. They landed as warning. Heavy footsteps came down the jet bridge. Slow. Deliberate. The cadence of authority arriving on schedule. Two airport officers stepped into the cabin. Dark uniforms. Broad shoulders. The kind of presence that fills a narrow aisle the instant it enters. The lead officer scanned the scene. Quick. Efficient. He looked at Brittany first. Of course he did. That was how the morning had been built. What is the situation? His name was Daniel Ruiz. 15 years on the airport detail. He had a wife and two teenagers and a quiet mortgage and a respect for procedure that had carried him through every shift he had ever worked. Brittany gestured toward Naomi without even turning her head. Passenger in the wrong seat. Refusing to move. Already given multiple chances to cooperate. Ruiz nodded once. Then he looked at Naomi. Really looked. The blazer. The watch. The stillness that did not match the description he had just been given. Something flickered in his face. It was gone just as fast. Ma'am, he said. His voice was firm. Already halfway to a conclusion. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings. Naomi did not move. She did not reach. She did not argue. She did not look at her bag. She just held his gaze. Steady. Level. The kind of eye contact that does not challenge and does not submit. The kind that waits. The entire cabin leaned forward without realizing it. For what reason? Naomi asked. Her voice was quiet. But it landed harder than Brittany's had. The way a small stone, dropped from the right height, lands harder than a loud one. Ruiz shifted his weight. Ma'am, we have been informed that you are not seated in your assigned section. We need you to come with us so we can verify your ticket at the gate. Verify it here, Naomi said. No hesitation. No volume. Used a statement of what could be done in the seat she was already sitting in. Brittany stepped forward before Ruiz could answer. She has been given multiple opportunities to cooperate, she said. Her voice was tight, controlled, calibrated for the phones. She is holding up this entire flight. Ethan's phone tilted closer. The zoom tightened on Naomi's face. Here we go, he whispered to his stream. Here comes security. The number in the corner of his screen climbed. Margaret leaned forward, eyes bright now. There was something close to excitement in her face. The kind of excitement people learn to disguise as concern. This is exactly how it should be handled. Across the aisle, Sophia finally pressed record. But her camera was not pointed at Naomi. It was pointed at Brittany. At Ruiz. At the small triangle of space between authority and assumption, where so many quiet harms had been done for so long that the people doing them had stopped noticing themselves doing it. Ruiz glanced at Brittany, then back at Naomi. He had seen situations like this before. Loud passengers. Tired passengers. Drunk passengers. Passengers who had missed connections and were taking it out on the nearest uniform. But something about this one did not fit any of his shapes. Style. Procedure was procedure. Ma'am, he said. Firme now. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. A small sound moved through the cabin. Not quite a gasp. Not quite a sigh. Just tension, tightening, the way a wire tightens before it snaps. Naomi's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the tray table. I am not resisting, she said. I am asking you to do your job correctly. Ruiz just hit that landed. Not disrespectful. But not compliant in the way he had been trained to expect compliance to look. Behind him, the second officer shifted, his hand brushing against his belt. Not threatening. Used to jesting. Used ready. Brittany folded her arms, leaning slightly into the aisle, taking back the floor. She is stalling, she said under her breath, but loud enough for the phones. They always stall. Sophia, too, rose back, felt her stomach turn over. She had been raised in a small town in Central Florida by a single mother who had cleaned hotel rooms for a regional chain. She had spent her childhood watching grown men talk to her mother as if her mother were a small inconvenience that had wandered into their morning. She had promised herself, at 15, that she was not going to be one of the people who looked away. She had not always kept that promise. She kept it today. Her thumb hovered over the record button. She pressed it. She held the phone steady. Calvin exhaled, shaking his head. Man, he muttered. Then louder. You have not even checked her ticket properly. Brittany snapped toward him. Sir. He told you to remain seated. And I told you I saw it. His voice was not loud. It was just grounded. The kind of grounded that comes from a man who has spent decades pouring concrete in straight lines. The cabin split. You could feel it. So many passengers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, embarrassed to be in the middle of it. Others leaned forward, more engaged. Ethan kept filming. But his narration slowed. The certainty in his voice had thinned, just a little, the way confidence thins in a man who is starting to suspect he has bet on the wrong horse. Ruiz raised a hand slightly. A note to quiet the cross-talk. Let us keep this focused, he said. Then to Naomi. Do you have identification on you? Naomi nodded once. Yes. Then I need you to show it to me. A bit. Naomi's hand moved. Slowly. Not hesitant. Deliberate. She reached for the leather bag at her feet. She unzipped it just enough to slip her fingers inside. Ruiz watched closely. The second officer straightened. The phones tilted forward. Every small movement of Naomi's hands was magnified by 20 lenses. She drew out a slim black wallet. Worn just enough to suggest it had been used for years, rather than chosen yesterday to display. She opened it. Something inside caught the light. A platinum card. It glinted for half a second before she slid it aside and removed her driver's license. Ruiz's eyes flicked down. Then back up. Something registered. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to slow him. Naomi held the license out. He took it. Read it. His brow tightened, very slightly. Behind him, Brittany leaned in. It's probably fake, she said. Though quickly. Ruiz did not answer. He looked at the license. Then at Naomi. Really looked, this time. The stillness. The composure. The complete absence of the panic he had been trained to expect from people who had something to hide. People who lied did not look like this. People who bluffed did not breathe like this. The cabin felt it. That small shift. The kind of shift a building makes just before someone realizes the foundation has moved. Sophia zoomed in, whispered under her breath. Wait. Ethan lowered his phone a fraction of an inch. Margaret's smile faltered. Ruiz handed the license back. Slowly. Carefully. As though he had just realized he was holding something that did not belong to the situation he had been called into. Do you have your booking confirmation? He asked. Naomi reached for her phone. Unlocked it. 2 taps. She turned the screen toward him. The glow reflected against the lenses of his sunglasses, which were folded into his shirt pocket. Seat assignment. To a first class. Purchased. Confirmed. The booking reference was a long alphanumeric string that any airline employee in the world could recognize as authentic in 5 seconds. Ruiz did not speak. Not immediately. Because for the first time, the story he had been handed at the gate did not match what was in his hand. Everyone in the cabin could feel it. The narrative was cracking. Used a little. But enough. Brittany saw it too. The flicker of doubt on Ruiz's face. The way his shoulders had moved, half an inch, away from her and toward the woman in the seat. She moved fast to seal the crack before it could widen. She could have doctored that screenshot, Brittany said sharply, stepping closer. Her voice cut across the silence before it could settle into something dangerous. We have had cases like this before. Fake confirmations. Fake screenshots. It is more common than you think. Ruiz did not answer right away. He stayed on the phone for another second. Then he straightened. Presilla. Control. The familiar shape of the job he had been trained to do. He handed the space back to the uniform he was wearing. Ma'am, he said. Firme now. Louder, for the cabin. We still need to verify this through our internal system. I am going to ask you, one more time, to step off the aircraft. There it was. The crack snapped back shut. Doubt replaced with direction. The hierarchy reasserting itself in the way hierarchies do, which is rarely by force, and almost always by inertia. Brittany exhaled through her nose. Satisfied. The cabin tilted back into her favor. Ethan lifted his phone again, his confidence returning the way it always did once authority looked like it had picked a side. There it is, he murmured. Knew something was off. Margaret nodded, lips pursed tight with vindication. You can always tell. Sophia did not lower her camera. But her eyes had narrowed. She was not convinced anymore. She was not even close to convinced. Naomi tilted her head, slightly. Used enough to acknowledge the decision. Not enough to accept it. You already have what you need, she said. Ruiz's jaw tightened. Ma'am, this is not a negotiation. No, Naomi replied. It is verification. And you have completed it. The words landed clean. The way a hammer lands clean on a nail that has been carefully aligned. Ruiz shifted his stance again. Subtle. Visible. The second officer glanced between them, less certain than he had been 1 minute earlier, because this was not escalating the way these things usually escalated. No shouting. No panic. No resistance. Just calm, methodical pressure, applied from a seat that had not moved. Brittany stepped in again. Sharper now. Urgency creeping in around the edges. Officer, she is refusing a direct instruction. I am not refusing, Naomi said. Eyes still on Ruiz. I am documenting. That word hung in the air for a moment. Documenting. Ethan stopped narrating mid-sentence. Margaret frowned. Sophia leaned closer. Ruiz's eyes flickered. Documenting what? Naomi's phone vibrated again. 11. Then again. She did not look at it this time. I have sent 3 messages, she said. 1 to my chief of staff. 1 to my legal team. And 1 to a senior contact who oversees corporate aviation partnerships for the parent company of this airline. The silence after that sentence was not dramatic. It was heavy. The way silence in a hospital corridor is heavy. Because the people inside it can feel the shape of the thing they are about to be told. Ethan lowered his voice. Legal team, he repeated. More to himself than to his audience. He had stopped narrating outward and started narrating inward, which is what happens to a man who realizes, very late, that he might be inside a story rather than above it. Margaret shifted in her seat. Adjusted her purse. Looked at the carpet. Sophia's camera was steady. Her breathing was not. It was slower. Focused. The way a breath gets when you understand you are recording something that is going to matter. Brittany let out a small laugh. Too sharp. Too forced. Everyone has a legal team these days. That does not mean anything. Naomi did not look at her. Did not acknowledge her at all. Somehow, that was worse. Calvin watched the back of Brittany's head, and he thought, for a brief flicker, of his daughter. She was 26. She worked in the accounting department of a regional bank in Houston. She had come home for Thanksgiving the year before with a story about a customer who had refused to be helped by her, who had demanded a different teller, who had said, very loudly in the lobby, that the bank needed to hire people who could actually do the math. His daughter had cried for 10 minutes in her car before she had felt steady enough to drive home. She had not told her father about it for 2 months. When she had finally told him, she had apologized for telling him. She had said she did not want to make him sad. Calvin had spent his whole life building things that lasted. Bridges. Parking decks. The kind of work where you could come back 20 years later and the thing you had poured was still standing. He had built nothing, in all those years, that was sturdy enough to protect his daughter from a man who had decided, on sight, that her math was probably wrong. He sat a little straighter in his seat now. He kept his arms crossed. He was going to be a witness today. He had not been one then. He could not afford to fail at the same thing twice. I have also documented your statements, Naomi continued, still speaking only to Ruiz. The public accusation of fraud. The refusal to complete standard verification. The fact that this entire interaction has been conducted in front of, and recorded by, a cabin full of passengers. Ruiz himself. Slow. Major. Because now this was not just a removal. It was a record. And records, in his line of work, were things that survive the shift change, a press cycle, and the careers of everyone in their frame. Brittany felt it slipping. Again. You are overcomplicating this, she snapped. She is in the wrong seat. That is the whole story. Naomi finally turned her head. Looked at her. Not angry. Not offended. Used clear. My seat, she said quietly, is too ah. The words settled into the cabin like a stone dropping to the bottom of a deep well. Baying here, Calvin crossed his arms fully. It was no longer halfway standing. That is what I saw, he said. Clear as day. Sophia nodded, almost to herself. Ethan did not speak. Not this time. Ruiz rubbed the back of his neck, briefly, then dropped his hand. A small tell. But a real one. He looked toward the front of the cabin. Thou wert the open door. Thou wert the next level of authority. Because this was no longer a seat dispute he could quietly settle. He exhaled. Reached for his radio. Ground control. You need a supervisor on the aircraft. Passenger. Verification issue in the forward cabin. Brittany's head snapped toward him. We do not need a supervisor, she said. Though quickly. This is already handled. Ruiz did not look at her. Because now he was no longer sure that it was. And somewhere underneath the recording phones and the silent watching faces and the quiet judgments that had filled the cabin only minutes before, the balance of the room shifted. Not all at once. But enough. A note that the ending was no longer the one anyone in that cabin had been expecting. The new footsteps came down the jet bridge faster. Major. Heavy. The walk of a man who had been told to fix something and who believed he could. He appeared at the aircraft door with a tablet in one hand and a clipboard tucked under his elbow. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut paper. His name was Bradley Finch. Latte Fortis. Senior Shift Manager. The kind of authority that did not ask questions first. The kind that assessed, then decided, then enforced. What is the hold-up? He has swept the cabin in one pass. Brittany stepped forward immediately. Her relief was visible, even though she tried to hide it. Passenger in the wrong seat. Refusing to move. Already verified she does not belong up here. Bradley's eyes found Naomi. He paused. Not long. But long enough. Because she did not look like what he had been told to expect. No raised voice. No tears. No agitation. No scene. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that does not come from compliance. The kind that comes from a person who has already decided how this is going to end. Ma'am, he said. Stepping closer. I need to see your boarding pass and your identification. Naomi handed both over. No comment. No flourish. Used the exchange. Bradley studied them carefully. Long hair than Brittany had. Long hair than Ruiz had. He flipped the license over. Read the name. Looked up. Looked back down. Looked up again. Something in his face did not match the script that had been handed to him at the gate. But he did not say so. Not yet. These appear legitimate, he said slowly. Brittany's smile tightened. But, Bradley continued, turning slightly, projecting authority back into the room. Before a doubt could harden, we have had a number of incidents involving high-quality forgeries this year. We still need to verify through the internal system. There it was. A lifeline. Brittany exhaled. Bradley pulled out his tablet. Tapped quickly. Pulled up the airline's passenger database. His fingers moved fast. Confident. The motions of a man who had done this hundreds of times and had never been wrong in a way that the company had punished him for. Then his fingers slowed. A small crease formed between his brows. What is it? Brittany asked. Though quickly. Bradley did not answer right away. The booking was there. Naomi's name. Seat 2A. Confirmed. Path. No flags. No alerts. Nothing wrong with the ticket itself. But the loyalty profile looked thin to him. Limited recorded flight history with this airline. Minimal premium activity. For a passenger sitting in 2A on a paid first-class fare, the pattern did not match the patterns he had trained himself, over 20 years, to recognize. Bradley Finch trusted patterns more than he trusted people. That had been the engine of his career. He looked at Naomi again. Really looked. The blazer. The watch. Expensive, but not loud. The posture. Controlled. Though controlled, in his reading. He had seen wealthy passengers. Wealthy passengers signaled it. Wealthy passengers performed it. This was quiet. Calculated. And in his experience, anything calculated was something to be cautious about. Ma'am, he said, his voice tightening slightly. Did you purchase this ticket directly? Yes. Through our website? Yes. Do you have the confirmation number on hand? Naomi tilted her head. Almost imperceptibly. Would you like me to read it to you? She asked. Or would you prefer to keep searching for it in your own system? A pause. Sort. Sarp. Sophia's lips parted, just slightly. Ethan did not speak. Margaret shifted again, because that had not sounded defensive at all. It had sounded like the calm voice of a person who was used to being asked to prove what other people were never asked to prove, and who had decided that the proving was over. Bradley's jaw set. He tapped the screen harder. Because he was committed now. And backing down in front of a full cabin, in front of a flight attendant, in front of 2 officers, in front of however many phones, was not something he had ever done. We are seeing some irregularities, he said finally. The words were carefully chosen. Baggy enough to justify. Strong enough to hold. Brittany nodded immediately. Exactly. Ruiz's expression tightened. Because he knew exactly what that word meant. It meant nothing specific. It was the word that institutions reached for when they wanted to keep a hand on the wheel without committing to a destination. Naomi's phone vibrated again. This time she picked it up. Glanced at the screen. 3 confirmations. Receive. Her thumb moved once. A reply went out. She placed the phone back down. Face calm. Eyes steady. 4 minutes until departure, Bradley said. Louder now. Reclaiming the cabin. We need to resolve this immediately. I looked at Naomi. Given the circumstances, I am going to have to ask you to deplane for further verification. We will rebook you on the next available flight at no charge. There it was. De decisión. Clean. Final. Irreversible. Or so he thought. The cabin held its breath. Phones steadied. Eyes locked. Waiting. Because something about Naomi, the stillness, the absence of fear, the small private smile that had begun, very faintly, to settle into the corner of her mouth, did not match what someone looked like when they were about to lose. Not even close. Naomi leaned forward. Slightly. Just enough. Her hand moved toward the inside of her blazer. Slow. Deliberate. And for the first time, there was a small shift in the air of the cabin that no one quite knew what to do with. Because whatever she was about to do was not going to follow any of the scripts that any of them had been watching. Her fingers slipped inside the inner pocket. No ruse. No hesitation. Every eye in the cabin locked onto the movement. Phones tilted forward. Screens glowed brighter. Breasts tightened across the rows. Brittany's lips pressed into a thin line. What is she doing now? She muttered. Used loud enough to be picked up on 3 different recordings. Reese shifted his stance. Subtle. Ready. Bradley watched. Closely, chin slightly raised, already bracing for whatever theater this was supposed to be. Naomi drew out a slim black leather card holder. Nothing flashy. No logo screaming for attention. Used quiet weight. She opened it. Slid out a single card. Placed it face down on the tray table. Then she rested her fingers lightly on top of it. The motion was precise. Intentional. The kind of motion a chess player makes when they have already seen the next 3 moves and are letting the other side catch up. Aimé Finch, she said. For the first time, she used his name. It landed differently. Not as a request. As a calibration. Before you make a decision you are not going to be able to walk back, she continued. Her voice was calm. Steady. Carrying across the cabin without rising. I would suggest you ask Captain Walter Hayes to come back here and speak with me. In person. Bradley did not look at the card. Not yet. His eyes stayed on her face. Assessing. I have the authority to resolve passenger issues, he said. Firm. Mature. The smallest edge creeping in. I am sure you do, Naomi replied. But some decisions need a different level of awareness before they get made. Aflique. There. Es mal. But real. Brittany scoffed, louder this time. She turned slightly toward the cabin again, performing for the lenses. She is stalling. This is a classic move. You see it all the time. Ethan murmured into his phone. But his tone had changed. It was less certain. She just pulled out, like, some kind of card. I do not know. Sophia zoomed in. The edge of the card caught the light. There was something embossed in gold along the upper margin. But from her angle, she could not read it yet. Not yet. Ruiz stepped closer. Ma'am. We need to proceed. You can take any further conversation off the aircraft. Naomi did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on Bradley. Call the captain. Still calm. Still controlled. But now there was something underneath the calm. Not pressure. Not fear. Certainty. The kind of certainty that does not have to argue with itself before speaking. Bradley exhaled slowly. The cabin felt it. That second hesitation, longer than the first. Because this was not normal. Passengers being told to deplane did not speak like this. They argued. They pleaded. They escalated. They cried. They threatened lawsuits they would never file. They did not anchor. Behind him, a senior cabin attendant named Sarah Whitman appeared from the cockpit corridor. Early 40s. Composed. The kind of professional who could de-escalate a drunk man at 35,000 feet and still serve coffee with a steady hand. Bradley, she said, quietly, stepping close. Captain is asking for a status update. The tower is getting impatient. Bradley did not turn. Tell him we are handling it. Sarah hesitated. Then she lowered her voice further. He asked, specifically, about C2A. That sentence hit Bradley the way a small unexpected wave hits a man already standing in cold water. His head turned. Slowly. How would he know? I do not know, Sarah said. He just said it. By name. By seat number. He said it before I told him anything. A new kind of silence settled over the cabin. Ethan's whisper cut off mid-sentence. Margaret's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Sophia leaned forward an inch farther, her pulse beginning to make itself known in her own throat. Ruiz looked between them. Reading the shift. Because this was no longer internal to a cabin. The cockpit was already involved. And cockpits did not get involved in seat disputes for nothing. Bradley glanced back at Naomi. Her fingers were still resting on the card. Un moment. Un second. Waiting. Not for permission. For recognition. He swallowed once. Subtle. Visible. Hold position, he said to Ruiz. Then he turned and walked toward the cockpit. Faster than he had walked the other way. Less controlled. Because something was off. And he could feel the air pressure changing in his own chest the way some animals can feel a storm coming. The cabin watched him go. Every phone tracked him. Every eye followed. As the cockpit door closed behind him, Naomi lifted her fingers from the card. Used slightly. The card stayed where it was. Face up now. For one brief moment, the gold lettering along the top edge caught the cabin light. Sophia saw it first. Her breath stopped. Her eyes widened. Oh. My God, she whispered. Calvin leaned forward. What? Sophia shook her head. She could not get the words out. Could not process it fast enough to translate it into speech. Ethan zoomed in harder, but his angle was wrong, and the reflection on the laminate threw his focus off. Margaret squinted. Brittany stepped forward, trying to take back the floor. Whatever that is, it does not change the fact that. She stopped. Because, for the first time, she actually noticed the cabin. Really noticed it. The silence. The tension. The way every single face had turned, very quietly, away from her and toward the small piece of cardstock on Naomi's tray table. No one was looking at her anymore. They were all looking at the card. Waiting. Because something had just changed, and they could feel it, even if they did not yet know the shape of what. The cockpit door opened. Not slowly. Not carefully. It swung wide. Bradley stepped out first. And he did not look the same. The color had gone from his face. His posture was still upright, but something underneath it had cracked. Not broken. Not yet. Used cracked, the way a windshield cracks after a stone hits it at speed. Still in place. No longer trustworthy. Behind him came the captain. Walter Ayes. Late 50s. Silver hair. 31 years in the air. The face of a man who had landed planes in crosswinds, in icing, in the dark with one engine out, and who had never, in all of that, lost the steady neutrality that the job demanded. Until now. He says found Naomi immediately. Not scanning. Not searching. Lacked. Then he stopped, mid-step, like a man who had just walked into something far more dangerous than turbulence. Everyone stepped back from row 2, he said. His voice was low. Absolute. There was no room in it for interpretation. Ruiz reacted first. Instinct. He pulled back half a step, then another. He motioned to his partner to do the same. Brittany froze. Captain. We are in the middle of. Step back, Hayes repeated. Sharper this time. She stepped back. Because the authority in the cabin had just shifted, completely, and everyone in it had felt the shift in their shoes. Phones tilted higher. Brace tightened. The cabin had gone past silence into something else. The state of a room that is now bracing for what it is about to be told. Captain Hayes moved forward. Slowly. Matured. The way a man approaches something that might still be salvageable if it is handled with care. He stopped beside Naomi's seat. Looked down. Really looked. Not at her clothes. Not at her posture. At her. Recognition hit him hard. It flashed across his face before he could stop it. First shock. Then something deeper. Something closer to fear. Dr. Carrington, he said. Quieter now. Almost careful. I sincerely apologize. There has been a serious misunderstanding. The word rippled through the cabin. Misunderstanding. 2 minutes ago, this had been fraud. 2 minutes ago, this had been an attempt to sneak into first class. 2 minutes ago, this had been a non-compliant passenger refusing to leave. Now, it was a misunderstanding. Eason lowered his phone a few inches. He whispered into it, but the tone had changed entirely. Wait. Hold on. Who is she? Margaret blinked. Hair certainty was draining out of her face inch by inch, like color out of a cheap photograph left in the sun. Sophia did not move. Her camera stayed locked on the moment. But her expression had changed completely. Because she knew now. Or at least, she was beginning to know. Naomi looked up at the captain. Same calm. Same control. But there was something else in her face now. Not victory. Authority. Captain Hayes, she said. Her voice was soft but carried. I appreciate your presence. But I think we are well past a simple misunderstanding. She gestured. Not dramatically. Used a small movement of her hand toward the cabin. Toward the phones. Toward the dozens of lenses still pointed at this row. This entire interaction, she said, has been documented. Multiple angles. Live streams. Recorded statements. A gesture tightened. Because he could see it now. Not just the situation. The scale. The damage. Every second of this was already out in the world. Spreading. Multiplying. Permanent. Bradley stood behind him. Silent. Not intervening. Not correcting. Because whatever he had been managing 5 minutes ago, he was not managing it. Anymore. Naomi reached forward. Picked up the card. Held it between 2 fingers. Then she turned it. Fastened outward. So everyone in the row, and everyone in the cabin who could see, would be able to read it. The gold lettering caught the cabin light. Clean. Sharp. Unmistakable. Carrington Aerospace Holdings. Dr. Naomi Carrington. Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Commercial Aviation Division. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. Ethan read it out loud, without meaning to. His voice cracked halfway through the second line. Chief Executive Officer. Silence. Complete. Total. Margaret's hand slowly lowered into her lap. Her fingers, which had been clutching her purse strap for the last 15 minutes, finally let go. Sophia exhaled. Used the breath of a whisper. No way. Calvin leaned back in his seat. He shook his head once. He was not surprised. It was confirmed. There was a difference, and his face wore it. Brittany stared at the card. Eyes locked. Processing. Filing. Because nothing about this fit anything she had built in her mind. The story she had walked into the cabin with did not have a chief executive officer in it. The story she had told her co-workers in the galley 2 hours ago, in pieces, before Naomi had even boarded, did not have a founder in it. The story did not have any version of this woman in it. Only the version Brittany had decided to see. Captain Hayes did not move. Because he understood, exactly, what the words on that card meant. Carrington Aerospace Holdings. One of the largest private aircraft leasing and maintenance firms in North America. Billions of dollars in active assets. Contracts tied directly to airlines like his. To aircraft like the one he was currently standing inside. Naomi lowered the card slightly. But she kept it visible. She kept the truth, in plain sight, in the air. Captain, she said. Steady. Precise. This aircraft. Tal number November 847 Whiskey Alpha. Is currently leased to your airline by my company. I just closed his eyes for half a second. Used enough. Used long enough. When he opened them, the situation was no longer ambiguous. Not even close. This is not a misunderstanding. Naomi continued. It is a liability. And for the first time since the entire incident had started, no one in that cabin was thinking about a seat anymore. They were thinking about consequences. No one breathed quite the same way. The air inside the cabin felt heavier. Seek air. The way air feels when a pressure system drops without warning. Captain Hayes straightened, slowly. But the authority he had been carrying when he stepped out of the cockpit was no longer his alone. It had shifted. Redirected. Toward the woman in seat 2 Dr. Carrington, he said. His voice was controlled, but quieter now. Measured with care. I had no prior knowledge that you were on this flight. Naomi studied him for a moment. Not cold. Not warm. Used precise. That, she replied, is the point. The words landed clean. Because this was no longer about who she was. It was about how she had been treated, by his crew, before anyone in the cabin had known who she was. Behind him, Bradley's fingers tightened around his clipboard. His knuckles paled. He was doing the math. Cost. Contracts. Liability. Exposure. Every decision he had made in the last 12 minutes stacking up like weights he could no longer set down. Brittany took a small step back. Ten another. Her voice, when it came, was thinner now. Frayed at the edges. This does not make sense. Anyone can print a card like that. No one laughed. No one agreed. Even she heard it. Naomi turned her head, slightly. Finally acknowledging her. Would you like verification, Ms. Bass? Still calm. Still controlled. But there was steel underneath now. The kind of steel that does not announce itself until it has already done what it came to do. She reached for her phone. Unlocked it. A few taps. Then she turned the screen outward. A secure corporate dashboard glowed against the dim cabin light. Aircraft Registry. Lease Agreements. PAN number November 847 Whiskey Alpha. Listed clearly. Owned by Carrington Aerospace Holdings. Leased to this airline. Annual contract value, $2.7 million. Renewal date, 11 months from today. Captain Hayes leaned in close enough to read. Close enough to confirm. His face strained further. Because there was no arguing with this. No explaining it away. No reframing the narrative. This was fact. The kind of fact that does not flinch when you stare at it. Sophia covered her mouth. Oh my God. Ethan's phone dipped. Not lower. Used no longer steady. Wait. What? Is she? Is she actually? Esta Meredith. The narrator's voice was gone. It was just a man in a cabin now, the same as everyone else. Margaret stared straight ahead. Avoiding every gaze. Especially Naomi's. Calvin exhaled slowly. He leaned back into his seat. Arms crossed. Told you, he murmured. Quietly. To no one in particular. Brittany shook her head. Backing further into the aisle. This has to be some kind of setup. But the conviction was gone. The sentence was a reflex now. A hollow shape made out of muscle memory. Naomi did not look at her again. She did not need to. Captain, she said, turning her attention back to Hayes. My company currently leases 41 aircraft to your airline and its regional subsidiaries. Each word landed like a measured strike. That is 26% of your operational fleet. Bradley's breath caught. Audible. Because now the scale was no longer abstract. It was operational. It was structural. It was, for him, personal. Naomi did not stop. In addition, she said, tapping her screen once, Carrington Aerospace holds the maintenance contracts on 19 additional aircraft in your fleet. Including this one. I swallowed. Hard. His mind was no longer in the cabin. It was already in the boardroom. Already in the regulatory filing. Already in the press release. Already in the call he was going to have to make to corporate within the next 4 minutes. Dr. Carrington, he began. His voice was tighter now. We will address this immediately. I assure you. This is already being addressed, Naomi said. She gestured, slightly, toward the phones. Toward the recordings. Toward the silent watching cabin. Roughly 1,200 viewers across multiple platforms, she said. And rising. Ethan's screen reflected the truth of it. Numbers climbing. Comments flooding. The live feed expanding past the aircraft, past the airport, into something much larger than any of the people in that row had imagined an hour earlier. Aegis closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them. Because this was no longer an internal issue. It was public. It was visible. It was permanent. Naomi stepped forward slightly. Not to intimidate. To ensure. To be clear, she said. Her voice cut through the cabin with precision. I was publicly accused of fraud. My identification was questioned. I was filmed without my consent. I was humiliated. And I was very nearly removed, by force, from a seat that I paid for, on an aircraft that my company owns. No one interrupted. No one dared. Because every word was true. And everyone in that cabin knew it. Brittany's shoulders dropped. Bradley did not speak. Reese looked down at his own boots. And Captain Hayes stood in the center of all of it, finally understanding that this was no longer about fixing a mistake. It was about surviving it. And the next move would not be his. Not anymore. Bradley found his voice first. Barely. Even if. Even if that is accurate, ma'am. You still refused crew instructions. The sentence hung in the air for a moment. Fragile. Naomi looked at him. When she spoke again, her voice was measured. Exact. Let us be very clear about what actually happened here today, Mr. Finch. Her tone did not rise. It tightened. And when it tightened, every person in the cabin leaned in without realizing they were leaning. Your employee publicly accused me of fraud. Without verification. Without cause. Based solely on assumption. Each word landed like evidence being placed on a table in front of a full cabin while everything was still being recorded. Bradley opened his mouth. Closed it. Because there was no interruption that would not make it worse. Naomi did not pause. She then escalated the situation by calling airport security. Again. Without completing standard verification procedures. Ruiz shifted his weight. Subtle. But visible. Because he knew she was right. Naomi's gaze flicked toward him. Not accusatory. Used inclusive. The kind of glance that does not single out a man, but does not let him pretend he was not in the room either. You were asked to enforce a removal, she continued, based on incomplete and inaccurate information. Ruiz exhaled quietly. His has lowered for half a second. Naomi turned back to Bradley. And then you arrived. You reviewed valid documentation. You confirmed the seat assignment. And you still chose to remove me. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Sophia's recording hand steadied. Isen did not speak. Margaret stared at her lap. Calvin nodded once, slowly. Because now this was no longer tension. It was clarity. And clarity, in a cabin full of phones, was the most dangerous thing of all. Naomi lifted her phone again. A few quiet taps. Then she angled the screen toward Bradley. A digital document. Structured. Precise. Your airline's passenger service manual. Section 12.4. Bradley froze. Because he knew that section. Everyone in operations did. Crew members are required to verify passenger documentation through official systems before making any public accusation of fraud or misrepresentation. She let the words sit. Then she spoke again. Quietly. Was that protocol followed today, Mr. Finch? Bradley did not answer. Cold not. Because the answer was already in the room. In the recordings. In the silence. Naomi scrolled once. Another section. Employee Conduct Policy. Updated 8 months ago, staff are prohibited from recording or broadcasting passenger interactions without explicit consent. Brittany's head lifted slightly. To late. Naomi's eyes shifted to her. Finally. Fully. And yet, she said, this entire interaction has been streamed in real time. By your employee. To an audience that is now in the 4 figures. Brittany's breath caught. Her hand moved instinctively toward her headset. But the broadcast was still live. Still recording. Still transmitting. Turn it off, Bradley muttered under his breath. Brittany fumbled. The screen shook. Then it went dark. To late. Far too late. Naomi straightened. Used slightly. Not towering. Grounded. Unmovable. This is no longer a customer service issue, she said. Her voice was calm. But now it carried the weight of the entire cabin. This is a corporate liability issue. A regulatory exposure issue. And a public accountability issue. Each phrase landed harder than the last. Bradley's grip on his clipboard loosened. Then tightened again. Because he could feel it. The collapse. Not loud. Not explosive. Just inevitable. Naomi's phone vibrated again. She glanced at it. This Time, she answered. Carrington. No introduction. No explanation. None needed. She listened for a second. Then. Yes. I am aware. I am still on the aircraft. A pause. The cabin listened to every word. Yes. The entire incident has been documented. From multiple angles. Another pause. Her eyes did not leave Bradley. Prepare a full exposure report. And pull every active contract we have with this airline. I want it all on my desk by the time I land. Bradley's face strained completely. Because now this was not internal anymore. This was not damage control. This was escalation. Real. Immediate. Unstoppable. Naomi ended the call. Placed the phone down. Looked directly at Captain Hayes. Your move, Captain. Simple. Quiet. Final. For the first time since the morning had started, no one in that cabin was wondering who was in control. They already knew. Captain Hayes did not hesitate this time. He turned. Sir. Decisive. Bradley. Step aside. We are not discussing this further in the aisle. Bradley stepped back. Not because he agreed. Because he understood. Brittany stood frozen. Her hand still half raised from where she had tried, too late, to kill her own broadcast. Her eyes moved between the captain and Bradley and Naomi, searching for something to hold on to. There was nothing left to hold on to. Hayes exhaled. Steadied himself. Then he reached for his phone. Dial. Put it on speaker. This is Captain Walter Hayes. Employee Identification 4819. I need immediate executive escalation. Passenger incident involving Dr. Naomi Carrington. Silence on the line. Then a voice. Controlled. Tight. Did you say Carrington? Yes. Another pause. Long hair. Heavier. Put her on. Now. Hayes did not look at anyone else. He handed the phone to Naomi. No ceremony. No resistance. She took it. Smooth. Effortless. This is Dr. Carrington. No tattle. No explanation. She did not need either. The voice on the other end of the line shifted instantly. The polish came on. The breath got short. Dr. Carrington. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our profound. Naomi lifted her hand slightly. The motion was small enough that the man on the phone could not have seen it. But the cabin saw it. And the gesture, by itself, was enough to stop him. Let us focus on actions, please. The cabin felt it. That tone. Not angry. Not emotional. Used absolute. I want immediate termination of the employee who initiated this interaction. I want suspension and full retraining for every supervisory staff member involved. I want a public written statement from your airline, signed by your chief executive, acknowledging the discriminatory nature of what happened on this aircraft today. No hesitation. No softening. Used terms. The voice answered quickly. Done. No negotiation. No delay. Because they understood now. Exactly. What was at stake? Naomi did not stop. I also want updated verification protocols across all premium cabins. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training designed by an outside firm of my choosing. And real-time incident reporting tied directly to executive oversight at the board level. Another short pause. Then. Agreed. The word seemed to echo in the cabin. Final. Binding. We will have the documentation drafted before you land. Naomi handed the phone back to Captain Hayes. He took it carefully, like a man receiving something that weighed more than its size suggested. Anything further, Captain? I just looked at Naomi. Used for a second. She gave him the smallest possible nod. Nothing further at this time. The call ended. Silence filled the cabin again. But it was a different silence. Not tense. Not uncertain. Resolved. Brittany's shoulders dropped. There was no anger left in her face. No defense. Used realization. The slow private realization of a person who has, just now, understood that the next several years of her life are going to look very different from the way they looked an hour ago. Ruiz stepped back fully. His hands came away from his belt. The posture of enforcement gave way to something quieter. Awareness. Bradley did not move. Did not speak. Because there was nothing left for him to manage. Captain Hayes turned to the cabin. Straightened. Found his voice again. Ladies and gentlemen. The cabin gave him their full attention. Out of habit. Out of training. Out of the way a captain's voice asks for attention without asking. On behalf of myself, this crew, and this airline, I want to sincerely apologize. For the delay. And for what you have witnessed in this cabin today. His eyes flicked, briefly, toward Naomi. Then back to the cabin. What you saw was not consistent with our standards. It will be addressed. There will be no excuses. There will be no deflections. There will only be the truth, and the consequences, and the work. Calvin nodded once. Quietly. The way a man nods when he has been waiting, his entire life, for an authority figure to say something like that out loud. Sophia lowered her phone, slowly. Her expression was thoughtful now. Not triumphant. Used thoughtful. The face of a young woman who had just decided what kind of bystander she was going to be for the rest of her life. Ethan finally dropped his arm. He stared at the dim screen of his phone as though it were showing him a different person than he had thought he was holding. Margaret wiped her palms against her skirt. She avoided every gaze in the row. Naomi stood. Not rushed. Not dramatic. She looked around the cabin. At the people who had watched. Some who had spoken up. Some who had not. Some who had laughed at the wrong moment. Some who had nodded along to things they would now have to live with. This was not about me, she said. Her voice was quiet. But it carried further than anything else had. This was about what happens when assumption replaces verification. When training is allowed to become decoration. When systems quietly fail the people they are supposed to serve, and the people inside those systems stop noticing they have failed at all. She let that sit. No one interrupted. Change does not arrive because somebody powerful happens to be in the room, she continued. Change arrives when the standard is raised for everyone in the room. Including the people no one in this cabin would have stood up for. A beat. Quiet. She sat. Back down. Sat to exactly where she had started. Exactly where she had belonged the entire time. Outside the window, the runway stretched away into the late afternoon haze. Clear. Open. Ready. The aircraft began to move. Slow at first. Then steady. And as it rolled forward, something else moved with it. Not just passengers. Not just a flight. A shift. A line drawn. I stand there, very quietly, reset. Dignity is not a luxury upgrade. Respect is not reserved for people who already look powerful. And accountability does not begin only when the person who was harmed turns out to have a boardroom waiting. Accountability begins, or it does not, every single time an ordinary person is asked, in front of a cabin full of phones, to prove they belong somewhere they have already paid to be. If this story moved you, take a moment to like and to subscribe, so more voices like this one can reach more rooms like this one. And in the comments below, leave 3 simple words that you want to carry with you out of this story. Respect. Truth. Accountability.